Elena sat in her cramped apartment, staring at the single, flickering candlelight on her coffee table. The world outside seemed to be a blur, a haze of memories she couldn't shake, and fears she couldn't face. Her hand instinctively touched her stomach, a gesture that once brought warmth but now felt like a reminder of everything she had lost. She was pregnant, abandoned by the man she thought would be her partner for life, and now, alone with a future she couldn't predict. Just a month ago, everything had been different. She'd been planning a wedding, shopping for dresses, dreaming about the future. But then Jason, her fiancé, had left, no explanation, no closure, just a cold, text message that shattered the illusion she had built for years. "I can't do this. It's over. I'm sorry." Those words echoed in her mind every day. And now, here she was, sitting in a darkened room with nothing but her broken heart, her growing belly, and a mounting sense of fear. She had never imagined her life would turn out like this. As a waitress at a small local diner, Elena barely made enough to cover her bills, let alone think about the baby that would soon arrive. She had tried to put on a brave face, to make it through each day, but the truth was, she had no idea how she was going to survive this. No job, no partner, no family to lean on, she was alone. It was then, in the middle of her hopelessness, that she saw the ad on the community board at the diner. A man, William Stanton, was looking for a private caregiver. He was a billionaire, paralyzed from the waist down, and in need of someone to assist him with daily tasks. The job description was simple, but the pay was far beyond what Elena could have imagined. The offer seemed too good to be true. She read it twice, almost expecting to find some hidden catch. But there was none. Maybe this was her chance, her one opportunity to change the course of her life, to leave behind the weight of her past and build something new for herself and her unborn child. That night, she put on her best clothes, clothes that barely fit her anymore, and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, fixing her hair and trying to muster the courage to apply. She hesitated for a moment before reaching for her phone. Her hands were shaky as she typed out a brief message expressing interest in the position, briefly mentioning her experience as a caregiver for her aging grandmother. She pressed send, and then, with a deep breath, she closed her eyes, hoping against hope that this would lead to something better. The next day, to her surprise, she received a call. The voice on the other end was calm, authoritative. It was William Stanton himself. "I've reviewed your application. I believe you're the right fit for the position. Can you come to my estate tomorrow for an interview?" he asked. Elena could hardly believe it. Her heart raced as she agreed to meet him. She had no idea who William Stanton was beyond what she had read in the ad, but she knew one thing: this could be her chance to rebuild her life. The following morning, she took a bus across town, her nerves frayed with anticipation. As the bus wound its way through the city, the towering buildings grew taller, more imposing. She had heard of William Stanton, of course, she had. He was a name people whispered about, a billionaire whose fortune was as vast as his reputation. A man who had everything. The estate was located in an upscale neighborhood, where the houses were more like mansions, and the gardens looked like something out of a fairy tale. Elena had never been in such a place, and as she stood outside the massive gates of the Stanton estate, she couldn't help but feel small. The gates slowly opened as she approached, and she was greeted by a man in a suit who escorted her up to the grand entrance. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped inside. The house was cold, sterile, and overwhelmingly luxurious. Every piece of furniture seemed meticulously chosen, every piece of art hanging on the walls a small fortune. She was led through long, marble-floored corridors and down a spiral staircase, to a room at the back of the house where she was introduced to William Stanton. He was sitting in a wheelchair, his sharp, chiseled face framed by the light pouring through the large windows. Despite his condition, there was an air of power about him. His eyes, a piercing blue, watched Elena with a mixture of curiosity and scrutiny. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His voice was smooth, confident, too confident, she thought, for someone who couldn't move. Elena did as she was told, feeling a strange tension in the room. The silence stretched on for a moment before William spoke again. I assume you're here because you need the money, he said, his eyes scanning her. I understand. This job isn't easy. It requires patience, compassion, and, above all, a willingness to put your own needs aside for the sake of someone else's. Can you do that? Elena nodded, her throat dry. She had no choice. This was her way out of the mess her life had become. Good, William said, smiling slightly. I'll offer you the position, but let me be clear, this isn't just about caregiving. I need someone I can trust, someone who won't question my decisions. I run my life my way, and I expect those around me to do the same. His words hung in the air, and for a moment, Elena wasn't sure if she had made a mistake. But then she thought of her baby, of the future she hoped to build, and she knew she couldn't back out now. I understand, she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. William leaned back in his chair, watching her closely. Good. Then let's discuss the details. You'll start tomorrow. There's no room for failure in this house. She left the interview feeling conflicted. She had the job, but something about William Stanton, the way he looked at her, the way he spoke, felt strange, almost unsettling. She couldn't put her finger on it, but there was an aura of control that left her feeling off balance. Still, she couldn't afford to be picky. She had a job, a chance to provide for her baby. And so, with a mixture of hope and trepidation, she returned to the estate the next day, ready to begin a new chapter in her life. But little did she know, her decision to take this job would soon lead her down a path that would change everything she thought she knew about trust, loyalty, and the man she was about to work for. The real story was only just beginning. Elena walked through the massive doors of the Stanton estate for her first official day as William's caregiver. The house, despite its luxurious splendor, felt hollow to her, too grand, too perfect, a far cry from the chaotic, humble life she was used to. There was something sterile about the place, as if the house was meant to make her feel small, insignificant. The walls were lined with expensive art, sculptures, and dark wood furniture that looked as though it hadn't been touched in years. The floors were polished to a mirror-like sheen, and everything seemed immaculately arranged in ways that felt unnatural. A staff member greeted her at the door, a tall woman in a sharp black dress, who guided her upstairs to where she would meet William. His office, a large, open space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling estate, was where Elena would spend most of her time. She had assumed she would be assisting with daily tasks, feeding, bathing, dressing, but now that she was in the room with him, she realized that there was more to this job than she had anticipated. William was there, waiting, his wheelchair positioned at the far end of the room, facing the windows. He didn't acknowledge her right away, instead watching the view outside. Elena stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of what to do. The room felt heavy with tension, and his silence made her feel like an intruder. She cleared her throat and stepped forward. "Good morning, Mr. Stanton," she said, her voice careful, trying to project the calm confidence she didn't quite feel. William finally turned to face her, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He just studied her, like she was a puzzle he was trying to figure out. Elena shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Please, sit," William said after a beat, his voice smooth and commanding. Elena hesitated for a moment before seating herself on the chair across from him. She had expected a warmer welcome, but he had already set the tone. This wasn't going to be an ordinary caregiving job. "Let me explain a few things before we begin," William said, his hands resting on the arms of his chair, his posture straight. "This isn't just a position to assist me with personal care. It's about managing my entire life. I need someone who can not only attend to my needs but also anticipate them. Someone who can read my mind, understand my moods, and react accordingly. You'll need to be vigilant, attentive, and, above all, adaptable. Elena nodded slowly, unsure of how to respond. She had anticipated being a caregiver in a more traditional sense, not managing a billion-dollar empire. I'm here to help, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. William smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. That's good to hear. But understand this, nothing will be easy. You'll be responsible for more than you can imagine, and if you can't handle the pressure, there's no room for failure here. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She had assumed this job would be a fresh start, a new opportunity to prove herself. But now, she was starting to feel the weight of what it truly meant. The day passed slowly, as William's demands kept escalating. He expected nothing less than perfection in everything she did. From preparing his meals to ensuring his medication was taken at precisely the right time, to managing the phone calls from his business associates and handling the staff, Elena quickly realized that this was more than just a job, it was a full-time, around-the-clock commitment. But it wasn't just the work that was grueling, it was William's presence. He was always watching her, always observing her every move. There were moments when Elena could feel his gaze linger on her, making her skin crawl, but when she met his eyes, there was nothing but a cold detachment in return. The days blurred into each other, and the weight of the job began to take its toll on Elena. The house was vast, and every corner seemed to hold an unspoken pressure. The staff moved about silently, almost like ghosts, completing their tasks without ever engaging in conversation. No one spoke to her directly unless necessary. The isolation began to settle in, and Elena found herself sinking into an emotional exhaustion that she had never known. It was in the small moments, when the house fell silent, that Elena began to notice things. The way William's gaze would follow her across the room, the way he seemed to be constantly sizing her up. It was as if he were studying her, trying to figure out something she couldn't see. He would ask questions about her life, questions that seemed innocent on the surface, but there was an underlying sharpness to them. "How far along are you?" he asked one evening, his eyes narrowing as he looked her over. "About 3 months," Elena replied, trying to sound casual. She wasn't sure why, but she didn't want to tell him too much. Something about his curiosity made her uncomfortable. "I see," he murmured, tapping his fingers on the armrest. "Is it difficult?" The question hung in the air, and Elena wasn't sure how to answer. Was it difficult being pregnant and jilted? Of course, it was. But she didn't want to admit her vulnerability to him. Instead, she offered a polite smile and a vague response. "No more difficult than life already is," she said. William's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Good. I like to hear that. A woman who can handle her own problems is a rare thing." Elena tried to brush it off, but his words stuck with her. Was that how he saw her? Just another woman to be managed, another task to be checked off. As the week passed, Elena's exhaustion grew. But it was only when things began to feel routine that the strange occurrences started. She had been moving through the day without incident when William called her into his office again. He was sitting at his desk, his wheelchair positioned so that he could face her as she entered. "Come here," he said, motioning to the space beside his desk. Elena stepped forward, cautiously, and he looked up at her with those cold, calculating eyes. "I need you to do something for me," he said, his voice low. "Of course," she replied, her heart racing. William hesitated for a moment, his gaze piercing into hers. "There's a private matter I need you to handle. It's not something I normally ask of anyone, but I believe you're the right person for the task." Elena frowned. "What kind of task?" He leaned forward, his tone growing more serious. "I need you to help me manage a situation. There's a person who's been in touch with me, someone who knows too much about my business. I need you to get rid of them." Elena's stomach dropped. She hadn't expected this. She thought she understood the parameters of her role, but this was something else entirely. I don't understand," she stammered. "You want me to?" "Yes," he interrupted, his eyes cold and unwavering. "I need you to take care of it. You'll figure out the details." The weight of his words hit her like a hammer. Elena stood there, frozen, not knowing what to say. She had no idea how she had gotten here, how her life had spiraled into a place where this job was no longer about caring for a paralyzed billionaire, but about something much darker, more dangerous. She could feel the walls closing in around her. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, what was she willing to do to protect herself, and her unborn child, now that she was caught in a world that had no place for compassion, no place for weakness? Elena stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing as she tried to process William's chilling request. Every fiber of her being screamed that this wasn't what she had signed up for. She had come to this job, desperate for a fresh start, hoping to find stability and a sense of purpose after the betrayal that had left her pregnant and alone. But now, she was standing in front of a man who had just asked her to do something unthinkable, something that would change her life forever. Elena started, but her voice faltered. She couldn't find the right words. She had come here to care for him, to help him with his daily needs, not to become embroiled in his dark, dangerous world. But William's gaze was unwavering, his eyes cold and calculating as if he expected her to comply without question. She knew that refusing him wasn't an option. Not with her situation. Not with her future hanging in the balance. "You want me to get rid of someone?" Elena repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign on her tongue, as if she couldn't quite believe she was even saying them. William nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth lifting into the faintest of smirks. "Yes. This person knows too much about my business, and if they aren't dealt with, it could ruin everything I've built. I'm trusting you to handle this discreetly, Elena. I'm counting on you." His words sent a shiver down her spine. Elena wasn't naive, she understood that the world of the wealthy and powerful was often darker than anyone could imagine. But she had never dreamed she would be asked to play a part in it. A part that might cost someone their life. She tried to push back the rising panic, her thoughts becoming a whirlwind of confusion and fear. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice shaky. William didn't respond immediately. He simply leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling together as he studied her intently. For a moment, there was nothing but the silence between them. Elena's mind raced with the implications of what he was asking. She had seen glimpses of his power, his influence, his cold calculation, but this was different. This was personal. And it terrified her. "You're strong, Elena," William finally said, his tone softer now, almost coaxing. "I've seen it in you. You've handled everything I've thrown at you so far. Don't let fear stop you now. You're capable of much more than you think." His words were meant to encourage her, but they only made her feel more trapped. She wasn't strong enough for this. She wasn't prepared for this. But the truth was, she couldn't afford to turn away. She couldn't afford to walk out. Not when her unborn child's future was on the line. Not when her own future felt so uncertain. I'll think about it," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper, her heart still racing. She didn't know what else to say. She couldn't bring herself to make a decision now, not with everything hanging in the balance. But she knew she would have to act fast. William wasn't a man who tolerated hesitation. The next few days were a blur. Elena moved through the motions of her responsibilities, caring for William, managing his phone calls, running errands, and trying desperately to avoid thinking about the request he had made. But it was always there, lurking in the back of her mind. Every time she looked at William, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching her, waiting for her to make a choice. The tension in the air was palpable, and Elena felt herself being drawn deeper into his world, a world she had no business being a part of. She couldn't help but notice the way William seemed to isolate himself, his eyes always distant, as if he were constantly battling something inside of him. There were moments when she saw a flicker of vulnerability beneath the cold exterior, a glimmer of the man he used to be before the accident had paralyzed him. But those moments were fleeting, quickly buried under layers of power and control. Elena wondered if he had ever been truly human, or if the wealth and power had stripped him of anything resembling kindness. One evening, as she sat in the vast, empty living room, scrolling through her phone in an attempt to distract herself, she heard the soft sound of a knock at the door. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't expected anyone, and yet, there was a certain dread that settled over her. She stood, walking cautiously to the door. When she opened it, she was greeted by the sight of another staff member, a man this time, dressed in a dark suit, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Stanton requests your presence in his office," he said simply, before turning on his heel and walking away. Elena's stomach twisted into knots as she followed the man up the stairs and into the office. When she entered, William was already seated in his wheelchair, his gaze fixed on the papers in front of him. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from a desk lamp casting long shadows on the walls. "Sit," William commanded, not looking up. Elena did as instructed, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been trying to push the events of the last few days from her mind, but now they were impossible to ignore. She had to make a decision. The longer she delayed, the more dangerous it became. "I assume you've been thinking about what I asked you," William said, finally looking up. His eyes were steady, unwavering, as though he could see straight through her. Elena swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "I have." "And?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "I don't know if I can do it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, William said nothing. He just stared at her, his gaze hard and unyielding. Then, finally, he spoke. "You think I'm asking too much of you, don't you?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a hint of something darker lurking beneath the surface. "You think I'm asking you to cross a line. But you have to understand something, Elena. This is my life we're talking about. My legacy. If you don't do this, everything I've worked for could be destroyed. And if you don't help me, there will be consequences for both of us." Elena's breath hitched. "Consequences?" William's gaze darkened. "I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make sure no one will ever trust you. No one will ever give you a chance. And I'll make sure your child never has a future." The words hit her like a slap across the face. The severity in his tone made her blood run cold. She realized then that this wasn't just about a job. This wasn't just about her trying to do the right thing. It was about survival. She had no choice but to comply, no choice but to play the game his way. If she refused, she would lose everything, the future she had been building, the hope she had for her unborn child. William leaned back in his chair, his expression neutral now, as if he had already made up his mind. "I trust you'll make the right decision." Elena stood there, frozen in place, her mind spinning. What had she gotten herself into? How had everything spiraled so far out of control so quickly? She had come here for a fresh start, a chance to rebuild her life, and now she was being dragged into a dangerous world of power, manipulation, and deceit. With a heavy heart and a mind clouded by fear, Elena made a decision. She would do what William asked of her. She had no other choice. But as she turned to leave the room, her hand on the door handle, a thought crossed her mind. Could she really go through with it? Could she betray everything she had ever believed in for a man who saw her as nothing more than a tool to be used? Only time would tell. Elena lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling in the dimly lit room. The weight of her decision pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had agreed to do it. She had agreed to carry out the request William had made of her. It felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in, of herself, of the life she wanted to create for her unborn child. Yet, despite the turmoil in her heart, she couldn't deny the cold, harsh reality that had driven her to this point. There was no way back. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. Her thoughts swirled, the fear and anxiety coursing through her veins like poison. What had she become? She had come to this house full of hope, wanting a fresh start, wanting to escape the life that had been torn apart by betrayal. She had thought that by caring for William, she could rebuild her future. But now she was just another pawn in a dangerous game, a game that she wasn't equipped to play, but had no choice but to participate in. The room seemed to close in on her. The silence felt deafening. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she wrestled with the haunting question that wouldn't leave her mind: what kind of person was she becoming? Her stomach churned as she remembered William's words. The icy tone in his voice, the threat hanging over her head. "I'll make sure you never work again. I'll make sure no one will ever trust you. No one will ever give you a chance. And I'll make sure your child never has a future." Those words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the power he held over her. She had hoped that this job would give her a sense of purpose, that it would be a way out of the pain she'd been living with. But now, she was caught in the web of someone else's twisted desires. Every day, she walked the fine line between survival and morality. She could feel herself slipping further into a world she never imagined she'd be part of. And the worst part was, she couldn't tell anyone. She couldn't reach out for help. If anyone found out about William's dark demands, her future would be over before it even began. As the days passed, Elena found herself walking through the mansion in a daze, mechanically performing her duties without thought or emotion. The days bled together, one indistinguishable from the next. Every moment spent with William seemed to take a piece of her soul. He was cold, calculating, and manipulative. She could see how he controlled the people around him, how his wealth and power were weapons he wielded effortlessly. He seemed to thrive on control, on the knowledge that he could make people bend to his will. And Elena had become one of those people. She had no choice but to be. The moment of truth arrived a week later. William's request had been clear: she was to meet with a man named Samuel, a business associate of William's who had become a liability. Samuel had threatened to expose some of William's more questionable business practices. According to William, Samuel had to be dealt with quietly, efficiently, and permanently. Elena had prepared herself for the worst. She had steeled herself against the fear, against the moral battle that raged inside her. She had convinced herself that there was no other option. She had to do this, not just for her unborn child but for her own survival. William was a man who destroyed people without hesitation. If she didn't comply, she would be the one to suffer. She knew that much. Her instructions were simple: meet Samuel at a remote location, somewhere far from the prying eyes of the city. There, she would make sure he would never pose a threat to William again. The idea of it made her stomach turn, but she had no choice. She couldn't back out now. On the night of the meeting, Elena drove to the secluded location William had given her. It was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, far from the bustling life she had once known. As she parked the car, her hands trembling, she took a deep breath. Her mind screamed at her to turn around, to run, to escape this nightmare. But there was no escaping now. She had crossed the point of no return. The meeting had been set up to look casual, a simple business conversation between two people with a common goal. But Elena knew better. She knew that this was no ordinary meeting. She was walking into the lion's den. When she entered the warehouse, she saw Samuel standing by the back wall, waiting. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp suit that contrasted sharply with the dilapidated surroundings. There was a sense of unease in the air, a tension that thickened the moment she stepped into the room. "Miss Elena," Samuel said, his voice low but smooth, his gaze fixed on her. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." She forced a smile, the kind of smile she had worn too many times in the past few days, one that hid the fear and the dread gnawing at her insides. "Mr. Samuel," she replied, her voice betraying nothing of the anxiety that was consuming her. The conversation began innocently enough. They discussed William's business, as though nothing was amiss, but Elena could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse, where she had hidden the small, untraceable weapon William had insisted she bring. The cold steel of the gun felt heavy against her skin, a constant reminder of the irreversible choice she had made. As the conversation continued, Samuel's demeanor shifted. Elena could see the subtle changes in his expression, the way his eyes narrowed as if he was starting to question why she had come here. It was clear that something wasn't right, and he was beginning to pick up on it. "Is there something you're not telling me, Miss Elena?" Samuel asked, his voice now tinged with suspicion. Her heart raced as she struggled to maintain her composure. She couldn't let him see that she was nervous. She couldn't let him know the truth. If he suspected anything, it would be over. "No," Elena replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'm just here to discuss a few things with you. I'm sure you're aware of the importance of keeping things confidential." Samuel's gaze shifted, and for a moment, their eyes locked. Elena's mind raced, the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She knew that this was the moment that would determine everything. She had to make her move. She had to end it. Before she could act, Samuel took a step closer to her, his hand moving toward his own jacket pocket. Elena's body went on autopilot, her training kicking in as she drew the weapon from her purse. In one swift motion, she raised the gun and pointed it directly at him. Samuel froze, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. What are you doing?" Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. Her heart was beating so loudly in her chest that she could barely hear his voice. The world around her seemed to slow down, and for a moment, everything faded away except for the cold, hard reality of what she was about to do. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And then, in the next instant, everything changed. The gun felt heavy in Elena's hand, her fingers still trembling on the trigger, her breath coming in short bursts as she stared at Samuel. His confusion only lasted a split second before his posture shifted, and Elena saw the shift in his eyes, the understanding, the realization that something was terribly wrong. "Why?" Samuel whispered, his voice tight with disbelief. He hadn't moved, but the air around them had become thick, laden with unspoken fear. Elena's body screamed at her to run, to end this nightmare before it consumed her completely. But the weight of her decision was already bearing down on her, she had already crossed that point of no return. She stood motionless, still pointing the gun at him, her thoughts racing faster than her heart could beat. What had happened to her? Where had the woman she once was gone? Just a few weeks ago, she was on the verge of starting a new chapter, dreaming of a life full of possibilities. And now, here she was, a pregnant woman, standing in a warehouse, holding a gun, about to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. Samuel's hand slowly moved away from his jacket, and Elena's eyes followed his every movement. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. One wrong move, and she could be dead. Her fingers tightened on the trigger, her thumb brushing against the safety, ready to take him down if necessary. "I don't want to do this," Elena said, her voice barely more than a whisper, trembling with the weight of everything she had been through. The gun was shaking in her hand now, her grip failing, the once certain resolve in her heart faltering. Samuel stood there, frozen, watching her. "I'm not your enemy, Elena," he replied, his voice much softer now, a trace of something else, pity, maybe? You don't have to go down this path. There's another way. You don't have to make this mistake. His words struck her like a blow. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that this was her only option, that this was the only way to protect her future and the child growing inside of her. But now, with the cold, harsh reality of the situation standing in front of her, she wondered if it was all a lie. Had she been manipulated all along? Had she been playing into William's hand, believing the worst in herself and in everyone else? The doubts swirled in her mind, and the gun lowered slightly, her arm trembling as the weight of the situation became clearer. She wanted to scream, to cry, to break down and escape this nightmare. But she couldn't. She was trapped, and no amount of doubt or regret could change the fact that she had already stepped too far into this dark world. "Please," Samuel said, his voice taking on a desperate edge, "there's another way. You don't need to be a part of this. Let me help you." Elena's mind raced. What was he offering her? Was it a trick? Was this part of the game William had set up for her? But deep down, a tiny voice whispered that maybe Samuel wasn't lying. Maybe there was a way out of this. "Let me go," Samuel continued, his voice more urgent now. "You don't need to do this. You're not just a pawn in William's game. You have more power than you realize." For a brief moment, Elena's thoughts slowed, the chaos in her mind retreating as she considered his words. What if he was right? What if there was still time to turn this around? The sound of footsteps echoed from behind her, and Elena whipped around, her heart pounding. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw William standing in the doorway, his figure framed by the dim light of the warehouse. His eyes locked onto the gun in her hand, and for a moment, Elena felt a wave of coldness wash over her. "Let him go, Elena," William said, his voice calm, almost disinterested, as if he was watching a scene unfold that didn't concern him. "I gave you one job. And you're failing me." Elena's mind snapped back into focus. William. She had forgotten about him for a moment, lost in the flood of conflicting emotions. But now, standing there in the shadows, his presence reminded her of just how much power he held over her. He was the one who had placed her here, who had manipulated her into this position. And she knew that if she didn't follow his orders, there would be consequences. "Put the gun down, Elena," William repeated, his tone growing sharper. "Now." The command was chilling. The authority in his voice, the way he used it to control everything and everyone around him, was terrifying. Elena felt the grip on the gun tighten once more, her thoughts crashing together in a storm of fear and rage. She couldn't let him control her anymore. She couldn't keep being his puppet. But in that moment, a wave of clarity struck her, like a bolt of lightning that cut through the confusion. She had been manipulated, yes. But she wasn't powerless. She was still her own person, capable of making her own choices. She wasn't just a tool for William to use. She wasn't just someone's pawn. With trembling hands, Elena slowly lowered the gun, staring at William with a newfound strength she hadn't realized she possessed. "I won't do it," she said, her voice steady, but with a force that startled even her. "I won't be a part of this anymore. I won't let you use me." William's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sinister smile as he took a step closer. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can just leave without facing the consequences?" Elena held her ground, even as the fear twisted in her gut. "I'm done with this. I'm done with you." For a moment, there was silence. A long, heavy silence that seemed to stretch on forever, as if the world itself had stopped spinning, waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, William lunged at her, his hand reaching for the gun. But Elena was faster. With a swift motion, she stepped back, bringing her elbow up to strike him in the chest. William staggered, momentarily losing his balance, and that was all the time Elena needed. She bolted for the door, her feet pounding against the concrete floor, her breath ragged and uneven as she ran. She didn't look back. The world outside was dark, the streets eerily quiet, but Elena didn't care. She had broken free. For the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She had made the decision. She had taken control of her life. But as she ran through the streets, her heart heavy with the weight of her choice, she knew that this was just the beginning. There would be consequences for defying William. There would be no escaping the darkness he had brought into her life. But for the first time, Elena felt ready to face whatever came next. Elena kept running, her legs feeling like they might collapse beneath her, but she couldn't stop. Not yet. Her mind was reeling, but it was clear, she had made a choice. She couldn't go back now. The streets blurred around her as her thoughts collided in a chaotic whirlwind. Her baby. Samuel. William. All of it had led to this moment. She couldn't help but feel a mix of fear and relief, as if she had just stepped off a precipice, not knowing what awaited her below. She couldn't stay in the city, not with the danger still lurking behind her, waiting to catch up. William wasn't a man who let things go. His reach was long, and his methods were ruthless. Elena knew she had just opened a door that she couldn't easily close. But there was no turning back. Her breath was ragged as she reached the bus stop, her hands shaking as she dug through her purse. She had no money, no plan. The only thing she had left was the desperation to keep running, to escape from the chaos that had overtaken her life. The bus arrived, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Elena didn't hesitate. She climbed aboard, slipping into a seat near the back, and kept her head down. She couldn't afford to draw attention to herself. She needed to disappear. As the bus rumbled down the road, Elena's mind churned. She thought about her life before everything had changed, the quiet moments, the feeling of safety. It had all been so simple, so normal. And now? Now, everything felt like a constant storm. She had left everything behind, her apartment, her job, her life. She hadn't even said goodbye to Samuel, who had been a lifeline, a small spark of kindness in the darkness. She didn't even know if he was safe, but she knew he had to be. He had seen something in her, something that made him believe there was still hope for her. But now, she was alone again. The bus ride stretched on, the minutes blending into hours. Elena dozed off for a while, waking to find that the city's skyline was far behind her, replaced by rolling hills and empty roads. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that she had to get as far away as possible from the life she had left behind. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder of the new life inside her, and Elena's heart twisted. She had no idea how she would provide for the child, how she would protect them from the chaos that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But she would figure it out. She had to. Eventually, the bus reached a small town, a place that felt like it could offer her some semblance of peace. She didn't know the name of the town, didn't care. All she wanted was to disappear. She stepped off the bus and walked to the nearest motel, the flickering neon sign casting an eerie glow on the quiet street. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a place to rest, to think, to breathe. Inside the room, she locked the door behind her and sank onto the bed, her body aching, her mind still racing. She didn't know how long she would be able to stay here, how long she could run before William found her. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of something else, something almost like hope. The phone in her purse buzzed, and Elena jumped, startled. She hadn't expected anyone to find her so quickly. For a moment, she thought it might be Samuel, or worse, William. But when she checked the screen, she saw a message from an unfamiliar number. Her stomach twisted as she opened it. It was Samuel. "Are you okay?" the text read. "I don't know where you went, but I'm worried. Please let me know you're safe." Elena stared at the message for a long time, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea how Samuel had tracked her down, or if it was just a coincidence, but one thing was clear: he cared. Despite everything, despite the danger, he cared. Her fingers hovered over the screen, the words forming in her mind. She wanted to tell him everything, to explain why she had run, to apologize for leaving without a word. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she was sure she was safe. "I'm safe," she typed back, her thumb moving slowly, carefully. "But I don't know how long that will last. Please don't try to find me." She hit send and stared at the screen, watching the dots as Samuel typed his response. "Please, don't shut me out. You don't have to go through this alone." Elena felt a pang in her chest, a tight knot of guilt. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he could help her, that he could keep her safe. But she couldn't risk it. Not with William still out there. Her mind flickered back to the conversation she had had with Samuel, to his warnings, his belief that there was another way. She had wanted to believe him, but she hadn't been able to see it. All she had seen was the need to escape, to survive, to protect the child growing inside her. But now, with Samuel reaching out, with his care and concern, she couldn't help but wonder, was there more to this than just survival? Was there a way out of the darkness? A way to rebuild her life, to find peace? The phone buzzed again, and Elena's heart leapt in her chest. It was another message from Samuel. "I'm here for you, Elena. Always." She stared at the screen, feeling the weight of his words settle on her. She had been so focused on escaping, on outrunning the life that had trapped her, that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care. But now, the possibility of building a new life, a life with hope, seemed more real than ever. For the first time in weeks, Elena let herself hope. Maybe there was a way to fix the broken pieces of her life. Maybe, with Samuel's help, she could find the strength to face the future, to protect her child, and to stop running. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to turn the page on the darkest chapter of her life and start anew. As she lay back on the bed, exhausted but somehow lighter, Elena knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be more challenges, more decisions, more heartache. But one thing was certain: she wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The end of this chapter was only the beginning.